Hey, DawgNation, I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Good to be back after a day off yesterday and a Memorial Wet Day weekend with my family that I really enjoyed. Obviously, hope all of you did there as well, and really appreciate you being with us here today. A lot to get to on the rumor mill. Now, there's also substantial, actually easily verifiable news related to Georgia recruits taking visits to UGA. We'll touch on that too, but pretty clearly there's a lot of interest about what also might happen for UGA related to the transfer portal. We will, of course, get to that on today's program. And without further ado, what do you say we get it started? Connor Riley stopping by today also to be a part of the conversation. So it's going to be a ton of fun. Glad to have you with us. DawgNation Daily, daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Dial 678-ESOG now for a solution to your foundation and waterproofing problems.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Man, what a weekend it was. I had one of those sort of Griswold family-style road trips over the weekend. This is one of those things that I just kind of like doing with my kids from time to time. So we drive from our home in suburban Atlanta, to Washington, D.C. Went to the Nationals game there that night. Record low temperatures, by the way. It's freezing cold all weekend long in D.C. We go up to Baltimore. We come back home. Stop by the NASCAR Hall of Fame. By the way, that was a ton of fun for those of you going to Charlotte for the Georgia-Clemson game later on in September. Ton of fun. So this huge weekend, and obviously so meaningful to be in Washington, D.C. on the weekend of Memorial Day, because when you think about the full weight of what it is that we celebrate or what it is that we honor and observe on this weekend, obviously be surrounded by those monuments to America's history and freedom and everything associated with that makes the weekend itself more meaningful. But it's also fun too, chance for us to get away. And then on top of all of that, as we're kind of traveling around doing all this stuff, you have this explosion of rumors about Georgia and the transfer portal. And it's kind of funny. We're at the Nationals game on Friday. So before it's freezing cold. Son, huge baseball fan. He's shivering, trying to pretend like that he's enjoying the game, even though it was obviously cold enough that he was ready to go home. My daughter would have, just turned her nose up at the whole thing. She was absolutely ready to get out of there. But in addition, while all that's going on, I'm also kind of following everything that's being said and talked about, up the possibility that, yes, Georgia might truly be in the mix, potentially add former LSU tight end. We'll call him former potentially. As I guess now he's still, somewhat in the most recently. That's the best way to say it. Most recently of LSU, Arik Gilbert. We've already talked a lot last week about Darian Kendrick. The possibility of the former Clemson cornerback is on his way here to the University of Georgia. So you're trying to, kind of keep up with all of this. Obviously, the transfer portal is going to be a big, big deal here over the course of the next few days. And I don't think anything kind of sums this up anything better than what I saw. I saw this morning. I guess maybe the tweet came yesterday. Georgia tight ends coach Todd Hartley tweets out something that reminded me a lot of what Hartley used to tweet in the past. It's for those of you listening radio podcast, I'll describe it. It's Jordan with the push-off on Brian Russell, then the game-winning shot in the NBA Finals. And Hartley says on Twitter, tomorrow, and he says GOATs, and obviously shows Jordan accurately stated as the greatest of all time there. Hartley references that. And, you're kind of left to decide, what does Todd Hartley mean by this? Now, there's a very good chance Hartley means, hey, he's got recruits coming in to visit his program. Obviously Pierce Spurlin, I think, has been confirmed to be there this weekend. You've got the potential UGA legacy tight end Lawson Lucky also expected to visit there as well. So this very much might be one of those type of tweets from Hartley referencing the future GOATs in the Georgia tight end room that he's going to be hosting as visitors here to start this upcoming week, and the removal of the NCAA dead period. But inquiring minds will remember it's this style of tweet. Remember, it was always the Jordan Pippen stuff, the Kobe Shaq stuff, the tandems of great players together. It was always those NBA-themed tweets that Hartley used to send out a bunch back when Georgia was simultaneously recruiting Arik Gilbert and Darnell Washington. Washington obviously came to UGA as part of that class of 2019, but Hartley was trying to send this message of, hey, we want this dynamic duo of Jordan Pippen, Kobe Shaq, this great tandem of players playing together. This is what Hartley was pretty famous for doing, back during that class of 2019. There were clearly some Georgia fans who look at the Hartley tweet and say, whoa, is this Hartley, kind of making another reference to Arik Gilbert? He's used the NBA theme for Gilbert before. Obviously, we don't know that, but clearly it seems like Georgia is potentially poised to not just add Gilbert, but maybe Darian Kendrick there as well. And on top of everything else going on around the program, that is certainly very exciting. Now, let me take a minute to kind of address this. We're going to go through a lot of stuff related to the Gilbert thing here. But there's one thing I feel like I got to go back and do here for a moment. And I really want to make this clear. Because when we bring up a name like Arik Gilbert, transfer portal, and you know the story here on Gilbert. Hey, at one point in time was considering coming to Georgia out of high school, chose LSU instead. Gets to LSU, apparently doesn't like it there. Ed Orgeron says he opted out of last season, but the truth is Gilbert was probably unhappy enough that he just kind of wanted to leave there. And then he goes to Florida. And after kind of publicly pledging a transfer to Florida, changes his mind on that for whatever reason. And since then, there has been some mystery surrounding where Gilbert would play and what he would do for the upcoming year. And that level of mystery just turns some people off. And it's just a fact, right? That level of mystery, that level of unknown, to some people gets interpreted as unnecessary drama. And I believe some people then kind of use their viewpoint of unnecessary drama to actually kind of blame Gilbert for it, saying, oh, he's cultivating this drama. He's trying to make this into some sort of soap opera. I think it's really, really important for us to say, before we say anything else related to this story here this week, to start the new week, I think it's really important to say that if there's drama surrounding Arik Gilbert, he is not the one that should be blamed for it. And in fact, I love what Gilbert's mentor, Terrence Edwards, the former Georgia wide receiver, said when he joined us on the show last Thursday, that for the most part, Arik Gilbert's kind of allergic to all of this. He does not participate in the drama. He certainly doesn't go on social media trying to, sort of drum all this up. If anything, this is one of those young men who probably has less attraction to his own phone than maybe a lot of other people of his same age group do. In fact, this is what Terrence said about that when he joined us on Thursday. And this is really important to remember as we kind of frame whatever's going to happen with Arik Gilbert moving forward.
Arik is a very quiet and reserved kind of guy. He doesn't really like the spotlight. He's not that type of guy that, with this whole process is trying to seek attention. He's just not that type of guy. I mean, he's a guy, he would leave his cell phone at the training facility and just forget it because stuff like that just does not appease to him. He's just he's very into his family, with his mom, and to his friends. He kind of stay away from everyone else if you're not in his inner circle. Doesn't, trust a lot of people, but the people he do trust, he trusts them hard. So, for people who don't know, he's just a quiet, reserved guy, just trying to make the best decision for himself and his family.
Boy, I think that's really an important overarching opinion to share here at the beginning of the Arik Gilbert conversation. And think about this. For all the drama that's out there, guy reporting this, somebody reporting that, people suggesting this, rumor mill that, almost none of this stuff ever comes from Gilbert himself. He is content to let other people talk about him without doing a whole lot of talking about himself. So if there's drama around Gilbert, it's media creating it. It's not necessarily Gilbert himself. But then beyond that, for those who don't follow recruiting or follow these kinds of stories as closely as others, I think some people might be left to wonder, why is there so much buzz? You read a story about Mike Griffith over the weekend at DawgNation.com suggesting that it's a possibility. Other reports out there that Gilbert could be coming to UGA. Some people are kind of left to wonder, well, what's the big deal here? This is a guy that, almost came to Georgia. Yes, he's a former five-star. Not all former five-stars pan out. Goes to LSU. Had some nice moments for the Tigers when he played there his freshman season, but it's not like, he was the, most dominant player in all the SEC or anything along those lines. And, there's, been some uncertainty about, what was going on with him this year. Why should we care so much about Arik Gilbert and where he lands and the possibility that he might land at Georgia? Once again, I'm going to turn to the words here of Terrence Edwards as an important reminder for why it's a big deal that Arik Gilbert might come to UGA, that UGA could still be in the mix here for his transfer leaving LSU, as has been reported. This is why this matters. Once again, strong words from Terrence Edwards.
One thing I can tell you right now, Arik is in peak condition. I mean, he's been training this offseason with me and strength and conditioning coach JT, and he's in peak shape, mind, body, and soul. He's back to the guy that I've known since the ninth grade, who I was trained since the ninth grade, and he has options.
Did you hear that there? Terrence Edwards, who knows Arik Gilbert as well as anyone could, who's followed him closely and worked with him closely, I should say, for years and years and years, says, he's in peak shape. Mind, body, and soul. He is the same as he was when he first kind of burst onto the scene as a young high schooler. in terms of the way that Terrence views the guy that he's worked with, developed, and coached, Arik Gilbert says, no, this is that guy. I recognize the guy that I'm looking at here. And he also says that he has options, choices to be made. Apparently, Georgia one of those. What is going on in terms of the likelihood that Gilbert might land at UGA? I think there's some things that have been said in the past that give us a little bit of a potential level of insight. If you read between the lines, I think you might be able to get a little bit of a sense about what might be going on here with the player that clearly has some value and could be a huge part of the final missing pieces for Georgia in a national championship push. But will he end up at UGA? Boy, I think there's some statements that have been made in the past that give us a hint about what might be going on. I'm going to tell you more about that coming up, but first, let me introduce the show. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, and we're glad to have you with us no matter how you get to us today, live on video, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and as a podcast wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. Glad to have you with us, and a big thanks to our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia for making it all possible. You know, ESOG, fun to do business with because not only have they been longtime friends of ours here on DawgNation Daily, they're also proud partners of UGA there as well. So they like it when Georgia does well. They're excited about the upcoming season, and they love serving UGA fans. We heard our buddy Jay from ESOG talk about that on the show last week. And the service they provide is obviously second to none when it comes to your foundation waterproofing issues. Two things that can give homeowners a little bit of pause, can maybe give you some sleepless nights. You could be concerned about that if you feel like you've got those issues going on. But Engineered Solutions of Georgia can put your fears to rest because they've got 2 full-time engineers on staff. They're also a solutions-based company. That means that when there's a simple fix to be provided, they will provide that for you. But sometimes it's just more hard work than that, right? I mean, sometimes it's one of those things where you really have to have an expert doing the work for you. Another reason to trust Engineered Solutions of Georgia, because I said before, they've got those engineers on staff. It's in their name. That's the reason why they have that word in there, because they have engineers on staff to help kind of make the structural integrity of your home, kind of put it back together the way that it's supposed to be. So give them a call. Very easy number to remember. Simply call 678-ESOG now. That's 678-ESOG now. That'll get you in touch with Engineered Solutions of Georgia. All right, we're going to get in touch ourselves with Connor Riley here in a moment. A lot to talk about with him today. We'll do that coming up. Before that, though, let's go around the doghouse here for today. It's assisted today by AAA, and I want to kind of keep the Arik Gilbert conversation going after what you read at DawgNation.com over the weekend, that, hey, maybe Georgia is involved in this Arik Gilbert, conversation. Maybe Gilbert could be, potentially transferring here to UGA. A lot of folks are kind of left to wonder, what exactly is going on? And I think it's really interesting when I go back and visit the past on this. I'm going to go back to the distant past here for a moment. Because I think what you see here when it comes to Gilbert is a player that, and if you're a Georgia fan, you would say this unfortunately, but a player that maybe over the years has had a little bit of skepticism related to how he would be used if he came to Georgia. This was clearly a guy from the state of Georgia who had some interest in Georgia, but also had some doubts about Georgia. I don't think that you can discount all of that. In fact, I want to play you a couple of clips here from interviews that Gilbert did with Jeff Sintel while he was a recruit. This is before he was committed anywhere. This is obviously before he signed with LSU. This is back when he was still in high school, and there was just some uncertainty in Gilbert's mind. Now, think about the 2019 season. That's a pretty lousy year for Georgia offensively, so if you're a offensive recruit, the fact that you had some doubts about Georgia, that would make sense given the way that Georgia was playing back then. We would all kind of acknowledge that. Let me start with this. So Gilbert was at one point in time also considering Clemson. That was a school that was involved in his recruitment. And Jeff Sintel kind of asks Arik Gilbert to kind of make that comparison, Georgia and Clemson. Now, listen to what Gilbert says about how he viewed Clemson in comparison to Georgia. And I think when you listen to these words, it gives you a little bit of insight into why Gilbert didn't choose Georgia the first time around. Here's Arik Gilbert.
Georgia versus Clemson. How do you compare those two schools?
I mean, they're somewhat similar, but Clemson, I feel, passes a little bit more. So, I mean, that's the difference between them, I guess.
So he says, I think that Clemson probably passes the ball a little bit more. And I remember at the time, there were people kind of getting out the stats and say, well, when it comes to throwing to tight ends, I'm not sure Clemson's doing that, all that much more than Georgia is. But the point here is not what Gilbert necessarily thought about Clemson, because he ultimately didn't go there. It's what he didn't think about Georgia. Just this thing of, Is Georgia really a passing offense that I want to be a part of? Is this really an offense that's going to get the most out of me? And you hear a little bit of a glimpse of that in Gilbert making that comparison with Clemson. But even in more detail with Jeff Sintel back in 2019 about what Todd Hartley was trying to tell him, what Todd Hartley was trying to kind of push on him at the time. And if you listen closely, you can just hear a certain degree of skepticism in Gilbert's voice about whether or not all of that would really be true for him there at UGA. Once again, here's a Rick Gilbert from way back in the past.
Coach Hartley, he really likes me, and I really like him. Obviously, his history, he brings that up a lot with David Njoku, his guys in Miami. So, yeah, that's basically what we talk about. We talk a lot now. I went down there for a visit, and we got to talk, so that was good. We just talked about how he was trying to change Georgia's offense around with the tight ends. Or not change it around, but just add tight ends into it.
So he says, listen, Todd Hartley's been talking to me a lot. Once again, this is back when Gilbert's still in high school, saying, we're trying to change this offense. We're going to get tight ends more involved. Hey, look at the guys that I've coached in the past. You can be that guy here. And I don't think it's saying it too strongly to say that as a high school senior, Gilbert just didn't believe that. He just didn't buy it. That of course you're going to tell me what I want to hear because you want me to come to your school. But I saw what LSU did a year ago, and I feel like I could be a part of that offense. Actually at that time it had been in that particular year. He's watching all that unfold. And then when he comes time to transfer, I've seen what Florida's done with Kyle Pitts. I'm not sure that Georgia can do all of this, for me. I think it's fair to say, based on Gilbert's own words, there's been a pretty heavy level of doubt about whether or not he was a good fit at Georgia. But simultaneous to all of that, it certainly sounds like Georgia never stopped recruiting, never stopped working, never stopped trying to convince Gilbert that things now were going to be different for UGA's offense. That was the kind of place that playmakers were going to flourish, and playmakers in particular like Gilbert have a chance to do that. Of course, when you see the success that Darnell Washington has, a freshman at UGA, especially late in the season, certainly there's some evidence to point to on that. In fact, many people remember after the Missouri game when Darnell Washington had a little bit of a breakout performance, and Kirby Smart was asked about that. Listen to the way that Smart pivoted. Listen to the way that Smart kind of used that as an opportunity to, you call it subtweeting a Rick Gilbert if you want to, or just flat out, obviously you can't mention Gilbert by name, but a lot of folks took this as, wow, this seems like a pretty public pitch to Gilbert, knowing that Gilbert was on his way into the transfer portal, maybe kind of a public example of what had been going on very aggressively privately of Georgia saying, we need you, you come here, we're going to use you. Here's an example of that from Kirby Smart going back to December.
Coach Munkin really likes using multiple tight end sets. It's done a lot in the NFL. And if you can mismatch people and, have ability to run the ball, but then also flex them out and throw the ball, it's really frustrating. If you go back to that play, the corner went over, the safety had to play Darnell, and he's saying, wait a second now, I got a Darnell on a safety, and those guys don't cover for a living. He made a nice throw, but you can never have enough good tight ends in the SEC because they're big, they're athletic, they can catch the ball. There's so many things they can do. So it's one of those things that we want as many as we can get, and we want to get them the ball.
If that's what Smart was saying publicly in December, imagine what he was saying privately. Obviously, you can't mention a Rick Gilbert by name in a clip like that, but I don't think you have to be, a genius to really decipher what Smart's trying to say there, especially given what was going on with Gilbert there at the time. Question about Darnell Washington. Oh, yeah, we got Washington. We're going to use him, but we want multiple tight ends in the field, which, Gilbert, I guess, technically would still be considered a tight end. We want multiple guys like them in the field because of the mismatches they create. We can never have enough. We're going to try to keep bringing them in. By the way, going along with guys like John Fitzpatrick and Brock Bowers and, other tight ends in the program are also, really good there as well. At least have certainly the potential of being. We can never have enough. We're going to bring them in. We're going to use them. That's fairly obviously, in my mind, a very public mention of what Smart would like to do if a Rick Gilbert could be, convinced to come to UGA there as well. But that's not even the most interesting thing that Smart has said in the last couple of months when it comes to the possibility of, potentially adding a guy like a Rick Gilbert. Do you remember when Smart goes on 680 The Fan? That's a sports radio station in Atlanta. And he was asked about, hey, you guys going to use the transfer portal and, you're going to add players, things like that. And Smart gave kind of a long answer. And in the midst of this long answer, kind of took lots of twists and turns. But there was one thing in particular that Smart said about the transfer portal and guys leaving one school to go to another that in light of what's now going on with Arik Gilbert, seems fairly obvious that Smart was trying to drop a hint to us a couple of months ago on an Atlanta radio station. This is a very, very important part, I believe, of what's been going on behind the scenes with Arik Gilbert. Let me give you Smart here in his own words.
Well, we're always actively looking. As soon as a kid pops in, kid jumps in from a different place, we're always looking and investigating guys. And, we're really slow to jump on something like that, because for us, we got to know that kid's going to be able to play right away, and he's got to be able to help us and use it that way. So, we'll look to see. I think at the end of some spring practices, you'll see some more movement in there when guys are coming out of spring to kind of see where they are on depth charts, and there'll be another movement of guys, and we'll be looking to get some guys. But we're also always looking at high school guys. There's 2 or 3 scenarios that are out there that people aren't thinking outside the box, that it'll be interesting to see if those play out. If you look back last year at this time and said, okay, if a kid was not signed, how did they end up at a place? There's been reclassifications. There's been kids that announce where they're going out of the portal that they're not actually signed. You don't actually sign until you enroll. So there's a lot of wiggle room left for a lot of these kids, and it'll be interesting to see how this plays out.
So the key takeaway there is Smart says near the end of that clip, hey, there are 2 or 3 scenarios that maybe are outside the box that people aren't thinking enough about. And one in particular that he brings up is, you're not actually signed at a place until you enroll at that school. That you can commit to somewhere out of the portal, but that doesn't mean anything else. That doesn't mean anything to you actually show up at that school. And pretty clearly, based on the way that Gilbert had pledged Florida, but not ultimately arrived there in Gainesville, it's not too difficult to connect the dots to say, ooh, maybe that was a reference to Arik Gilbert. We don't know that for sure. Obviously Smart's not going to fully reveal all of that, but contextually it would certainly seem to make some sense. Now, I've gone a little bit long on this, so let me kind of wrap all of this up. Let's say it does play out this way. Let's say that an Arik Gilbert, skeptical of Georgia's offense over the course of multiple years, is finally convinced this is the place that he needs to be. And he made that decision after initially announcing a transfer to Florida, but Georgia still didn't stop recruiting him even after that, and eventually won that battle over Florida to bring Gilbert in here. And then on top of that, you got the potential of also adding a former All-ACC cornerback like Darian Kendrick from Clemson, who, by the way, will play against his old team in the first game of the upcoming season. Let me just wrap all this up this way. There's already a lot of Georgia hatred out there. Fans who cheer for a different school find a lot of reasons not to like Georgia, and it's generally related to the aggressive recruiting tactics that UGA employs. If you think it's already bad now, wait till you see the things that message board guy says about Georgia once Georgia goes scorched earth this summer before the start of the upcoming season, bringing in gigantic playmakers left and right. Folks, the level of vitriol and just fire-breathing hatred that's about to come UGA's way from Florida fans and maybe Clemson fans, maybe even, Alabama fans who are obviously watching, Kirby Smart kind of, get his legs underneath him here a little bit as he moves into his 6th year as coach. It's about to be unlike anything we've ever seen before. Now, it's obviously a chance that maybe Gilbert doesn't come to Georgia. Maybe he goes somewhere else. Maybe the push to bring him here ultimately kind of falls unrequited here, and Gilbert makes a different decision. You've got to be obviously open to all possibilities. But it was certainly an interesting weekend watching these rumors and reports start to take shape. And when you go back and look at the past, you see a little bit of evidence about, hey, what maybe all of this might be about. These are certainly interesting times. Dead period ends, players showing back up for summer workouts, and when they do, you could see a couple familiar faces that played last year at other big-time places who will also show up there as well. All right, it's Around the Doghouse. It's assisted today by our friends at AAA. You know them for legendary roadside assistance, but let me get you thinking about them when it comes to auto insurance there as well, because when you switch and save with AAA, those who do save on average $529. That's a huge savings and a great thing, so please check them out online, AAA.com. That's AAA, AAA.com/auto insurance, and you can find out more about that today. All right, there's a lot more, speaking of more, to do related to all of this, recruiting, summer workouts, everything else. What a fun time to be a Georgia football fan. We're going to get to it all right now. Let's talk to Connor Riley, do a Kroger Fresh Take with him.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
And a guy who's been all over the news over the course of the last couple of days and will be all over it in the days to come. As I said before, our buddy Connor Riley as a part of a Kroger Fresh Take here today. And boy, Connor, I think this is really interesting. Whether you think about the potential of a Darian Kendrick, who we talked a lot about last week, or someone like Arik Gilbert, who kind of emerged as more of a possibility near the end of last week and then dominated a lot of the online chatter amongst UGA fans over the weekend. What a fascinating time here ahead of what we can confirm and know, that players are coming back for workouts and recruiting is going on. But obviously this transfer portal stuff on top of that is really pretty spicy right now.
At what point this weekend did you go full Vince McMahon gif and just fly back out of your chair? Was it Sunday night?
Yeah, I think probably so. I mean, listen, I'm clearly excited about this. I think that Gilbert is a big-time player. I can't certainly say for sure that he's coming here, but really for me, like I said, I was at the Nationals game Friday night. It was freezing cold. They're playing the Brewers. It was really not a comfortable experience. I have to admit that, but we still had a good time. But as all this is going on, you start seeing all this, the phone stuff flying around, texts and posts and social media and this, that, and the other. Just the idea that you just got to be we said this on Friday before we left. You just got to be in the mix for it. If you put yourself in the mix for it, then something good can happen. And I think just to follow all of this over the course of the weekend while I was out of town, to see that Georgia is just kind of in the mix for all of this, I take that as a good thing.
Yeah, Kirby Smart, to his credit, I think he adapted a lot last year on the field in terms of adjusting how he views this game and how he realizes Georgia specifically needs to win in the modern day of college football. And in the last, I would say, 4 or 5 months, he's pretty radically adjusted how he views the transfer portal because, obviously Darian Kendrick, I think, fills the need. But unless you're telling me that Arik Gilbert is going to play the X and he's going to play that outside wide receiver position for you, he necessarily doesn't fill that need. But on the other hand, he's just such a rarefied talent that goes sort of into the recruiting threshold or thinking of, hey, this guy's talented, let's go out there and bring him in. And it's something either, and you've seen Alabama do this with Henry To'oTo'o and Jamison Williams. It's either, it might be nice to say, we want to go and recruit high school kids and develop high school recruits, but if Alabama's taking transfer kids and Georgia's taking transfer kids, it better be time to get on board and say, hey, we got to go out there and get as many big fish as we can.
Yeah, completely agree that you can decide what you want to be in. There's a very small number of teams who are truly competing for national championships. But if you want to be in that group, then you have to do what they do, which is look to add as many elite players as you can. Now, if you want to go kind of play at the level below that and be about bowl games and hope both teams have fun and, kind of all the stuff, associated with that, then you can be less aggressive on the recruiting trail and in the transfer portal and just kind of be happy going to the Florida Bowl game and, get a good education and all that kind of stuff, which is not to say that any of that's bad. But there is a cost for doing business if you want to play at the national championship level, and looking to add best player available type recruits and best player available type transfers is the cost of doing that business.
Right. This is just the price of admission to getting into the party. And part of me wonders with all this, how does Dan Mullen feel right now if Georgia gets Kendrick and they get Gilbert? Because one of the things talking about Mullen, he was great in the transfer portal. Well, if Kirby's going to do great in the transfer portal and he's still going to do great recruiting, where exactly does that leave our favorite Florida head coach?
Oh, yeah, listen, I think there's so much to unpack here with Florida. As I said before, right before you joined us, the level of anger that's about to come from Florida, if Arik Gilbert went to Florida, said he was transferring to Florida, changed his mind, ended up going to Georgia, the level of anger that's coming from Florida fans to Mullen for why didn't you get this guy?
Yeah.
Just the sort of general nature of the fact that Georgia, with as talented as the roster is, still didn't choose to stand pat and went to go, be, more aggressive in all of this. I think the level of anger that's about to come from Gainesville is going to be a sight to behold. It's going to be, for those of us who kind of revel in the fact that if your rival's mad at you, you must be doing something right. Well, Georgia, I believe, if this goes down, the evidence that you need that Georgia has done something really right is how mad that Florida's going to be about.
I'm going to use another sport here, but one of the things that's really impressed me about Trae Young in recent weeks is how comfortable he's been being the villain and absolute, he might be the second most hated person in New York behind Bill de Blasio right now. Georgia's going to be comfortable, very comfortable wearing the black hat, being the villain, being the anti-hero in college football, because at the end of the day, Alabama is still the chief target, the chief villain, the chief big bad, so to speak. And while Georgia's not exactly your sterling knight in shining armor, they're going to have to start doing some things, and we've seen that they are if they go out and land a Gilbert and they land a Kendrick to be sort of that anti-hero, Tony Soprano, Walter White kind of figure in college football.
And here's the other thing is, and I don't want to spend too much time on this because it's just too deep in the weeds, but there's these questions that hang over Gilbert, and I believe in some cases they hang over Gilbert unfairly. And, let's just be honest, some of this is related to academics. And, I mean, the only, reporting that's gone on this has come from Gainesville, which would lead you to believe maybe those sources, came from Florida. I hope recruits are noticing that part of this. I hope recruits are paying attention to. Now, listen, we've said this about Georgia there as well. When certain player transfers out of certain athletic program around this university, and there's this spin after the fact. We've said before we don't like that.
Yeah.
We don't like that kind of stuff. We don't like throwing players under the bus. I just hope recruits are paying attention to what was said outside of Gainesville when Gilbert chose not to come there.
Yep.
And boy, there's going to be some need for some fact checking after the fact on some of that related to what may have gone on when Gilbert announced he was not going to Florida.
With regards to Gilbert's academics, and I feel comfortable saying this, Georgia would not be pursuing him if they did not think that they could get him eligible. And there's been some questions in years past about guys. I remember George Pickens in particular. It was like, well, is he going to qualify to be at Georgia? That was never an issue. And so I think if Georgia is going all in on Arik Gilbert, and Georgia, mind you, is not the only team trying to go all in on Gilbert. It is LSU. It is Tennessee, to our knowledge, right now as well. So the academic questions, while they will certainly need to be cleared up, if Georgia did not believe that they were going to have Arik Gilbert eligible and ready to play for this 2021 season, I don't believe that they would be out here pursuing him as vigorously as they are.
Yeah, I don't want to explore semantics too much, but the clip that I played from Terrence Edwards, the former Georgia wide receiver, who obviously is a mentor to Gilbert, when he was on the show last Thursday, said it multiple times over the course of this interview, Gilbert has options right now. He has options right now. Options generally would be related to your eligibility. So I just think I just think that there's a lot that's been potentially said about him that you just got to be really, really careful about, because maybe some of the people who were saying it had a motive for why they were saying it.
Exactly. I mean, Florida has, I think, a very clear reason to try and not cover its tracks, but to cover its bases and say, hey, we tried to bring this guy in, didn't work out, here's potentially why that's the case.
Yeah.
When I think they knew back then that, hey, this guy could come back to haunt us, either going back to LSU or possibly going to Georgia or Tennessee, programs that Florida is going to play in 2021.
Anything you want to add on Darian Kendrick before we kind of change the subject on this? It seems like, we played some audio last week from a interview that Kendrick had done, kind of an obscure podcast interview where, he talked about, hey, I wish I'd have communicated with Dabo Swinney a little bit differently, seemed to enjoy his time at Clemson, seems to want to learn from whatever it is that he's kind of dealt with. It sounds like he's, if you listen to the full hour-long interview that Kendrick recently did, it sounds like he's had some challenges in his hometown, whether it be his own family, he's got 2 children, or whether it be, I don't even know what. But it sounds like, he's had, he's just spent a lot of time, I guess it's Rock Hill where he's from. He spent a lot of time in Rock Hill, away from the Clemson program, maybe more time than he should have. And, it sounds like he has some regrets about that, wants to learn from that.
Yeah, I think, again, as much as we talk about these guys and as much as we hype them up and discuss them as these all-world athletes, it's worth keeping in mind most of these guys are 20, 21, 22 years old. These guys are still largely kids, and I think sometimes we lose sight of the fact that these are people too. You obviously, I think, see that in the NBA right now with some of the fan behavior and fan culture out there, but at the end of the day, these are people, and Darian Kendrick should be allowed to grow up and both make mistakes and learn from his mistakes. I think you've been very accurate in saying just because he makes a mistake one time doesn't mean that he should be barred forever from playing college football, getting a chance to play at a higher college level.
Yeah.
And so because of that, the Kendrick stuff, it's been the worst kept secret around Athens for the past week or so now. And, I don't know if there's going to be a big announcement from his personal Twitter feed or if he just sort of shows up, goes about his business quietly. But either way, I've been saying, I think for a while now, and credit to you for speaking it into existence, so to speak, I think Darian Kendrick's going to be one of Georgia's 2 starting cornerbacks on September 4th when they play in Charlotte against Clemson.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. Kendrick's another one of these guys, very, I guess, different than a lot of the young people we talk about in the show. He's just not really active on social media. Does not post a lot, not really all that interested in that, it would seem. So it's kind of funny. We're talking about 2 guys, both Gilbert and Kendrick here, who are not crazy active on social media, that we may be left to kind of, I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to be like with some binoculars in the bushes or whatever else. But you may be left to kind of go through some of those paces a little bit to kind of figure this out, because obviously Georgia's not in the business of hyping up arrivals like this. And the players would be free to, but in the case of both Kendrick and Gilbert, that's just not really either of those guys' style.
Right, that's just something they're not going to want to do. At least from what I know and what we can tell you here, June 11th is a big day to pay attention to. That is when classes for the summer session start, so to speak. Obviously, Georgia has guys arriving on campus today for voluntary off-season workouts.
But you don't have to be there by June 11th,
Correct.
Right?
No, you can show up later. That is just if you want to be enrolled in classes over the summer and start working towards your degree in that manner. June 11th is sort of the date to know there. But obviously, you can show up in July as players have in the past with Georgia.
Let me say one more thing about Gilbert here, too, before we change the subject, because you did bring up something a moment ago that I think is kind of interesting. Okay, so do you view him as a tight end? Do you view him as a wide receiver? And I guess this is one of those things where I've changed my opinion over the course. If you want to go back to what I was saying probably in 2019, I was considering Gilbert a tight end. My belief is that recruits, for the most part, always want to play the most glamorous version of their position, and yet in reality, they probably are going to be a little closer to the sort of the typical benchmark for that position. In other words, defensive backs want to be corners instead of safeties. Offensive linemen want to be tackles instead of interior offensive linemen. That's just kind of considered the more glamorous position. And I sort of thought the same thing with Arik Gilbert in that, well, if he's a pass catcher, obviously he'd like to be a wide receiver because that's viewed as more glamorous than tight end, but he's probably a little bit more of a tight end. The point of saying all that is, when you see the success that Pitts has for Florida a year ago, and I'm not saying that Gilbert will be as good as Kyle Pitts because that's really hard to be able to do.
Yep.
But I'm just not as interested in putting these tight ends in boxes anymore. And I would say the same thing about Darnell Washington there as well, and potentially Brock Bowers, or really any guy in that tight end room for Georgia now, that this notion that tight end is this other thing that's way different from wide receiver. I don't really view it that way anymore. And when I kind of isolate Gilbert's talent, talent and his skill set profile, why couldn't he be one of Georgia's best wide receivers, just given the obvious, prodigious talent that he brings to the table?
So I mentioned earlier that Kirby Smart in the past has gone on record and says he wants the transfer portal to be a need-based sort of thing for this Georgia program, and that we only want to use it if there's a need on this roster. And I don't know how you look at tight end right now and the talent they have in that room and call that a need. But since Gilbert has committed to Florida and decommitted to Florida, what has happened and what need has popped up on Georgia's roster? It's at that X position.
Yeah.
George Pickens, we don't know his status, and we won't know the status of his rehab probably until August, September, in terms of if he's going to be able to come back and how that ends up looking. So Georgia right now has a need at the X receiver, and I say that, and I was going through this weekend and just thinking, if Gilbert does go to Georgia, I absolutely just believe we should move him from tight end, and I don't say we, I mean, not us, but I think he should move.
If only I had that kind of power to start moving guys around the.
I think he should be an X in Georgia's offense. I think he's got the physical skill set to do it. George Pickens is not exactly a burner. Now, he's an incredible athlete, an incredible leaper, but I think Gilbert has the skill set necessary, and Terrence Edwards has told us this time and time again. I think Gilbert is a guy who you can put outside there and has the quickness and leaping ability to really make defenses pay. And so at the end of the day, if you're able to get, say, a package out there where you have Jermaine Burton, Kyrus Jackson, Darnell Washington, and Arik Gilbert out there on the formation, whether it be a 3x1 or even a 2x2 if you want to, I think that's something that Georgia seriously needs to consider, because if there's a way for Georgia to get its best players on the field, and I think Gilbert would be that if he comes to Georgia, you have a field where you have Darnell Washington and Arik Gilbert out there at different points in the field. Good luck defending that.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right about that. One more thing on this. On the one hand, I think the sky is the limit for what Gilbert could do, as you just described, as a wide receiver. I think he would have the potential of, even though he doesn't know the offense, and even though he technically isn't even here yet, at least not that we know of, I think he'd still have the potential of being among Georgia's leading receivers, if not Georgia's leading receiver this upcoming year. That's like the high end of possibility. But on the other hand, and it is just kind of fair to point this out to make sure you kind of give the full, width of the discussion.
Yep.
When Demetrius Robertson was a freshman All-American at Cal, he had nearly 800 yards receiving, which would be a huge high water number for most Georgia receivers under Kirby Smart. The idea that, these years later, that Robertson hasn't found anywhere near that level of success at Georgia that he found at Cal when he was healthy for that team back in 2016. I would have obviously been shocked to hear that was true, and I never would have expected that. I don't know. I'm only bringing this up to say that sometimes what looks to be a sure thing and a given, for whatever reason, doesn't quite work out that way. And so that's also a possibility for Gilbert there as well, that it just kind of never falls into place and he ends up, not making the impact that I think is a possibility for him. So you do have two pretty wide, potential levels of achievement here. The Robertson comparison, I think, is one that has to at least be mentioned.
Right, and I think you look, again, we don't know if and when Gilbert shows up at campus, but Demetrius Robertson was someone who didn't get clearance until into fall camp, and I think that absolutely impacted his first year on campus there. And again, as much as we hype up these guys and talk about these 5 stars, the reality is a lot of them, more than you think, don't end up panning out or don't end up being these superstars that we think they are going to be coming from the recruiting world. And that's why Georgia is sort of, and Alabama had pioneered this, but Georgia has sort of adopted it as well, going out and just recruiting as many 5 stars or as many highly talented guys as you are, because you're not going to hit on all of them. And Nick Saban understood that, and Kirby Smart understands that as well. So if you have a Gilbert, a Burton, a Roseby Jack-Saint, Arian Smith, Darnell Washington, potentially a George Pickens, Dominic Blaylock as well, you don't need all those guys to hit or become real star players for you, but enough of them will if you just allow the natural competition to sort of sort itself out.
I would obviously bet on Gilbert being one who has more chance at succeeding because he brings the physical tools to the table. In other words, it's one thing to be overwhelmed by the SEC because you have a hard time matching the physicality of the other guy. Gilbert just has this body type that clearly belongs in the SEC.
There aren't very many athletes, period, out there like an Arik Gilbert.
I want to ask you about recruiting, but let me remind folks, it's our Kroger Fresh Take with Connor Riley here on DawgNation Daily here today, and we're kind of in the midst of summer right now. Many of you enjoyed the weekend this past weekend. You got more summer plans along the way. Of course, Kroger's got you covered for all that. You can get your new grill there. You can get patio furniture. They got great savings on that. Pool supplies. All kinds of great stuff, those cookouts, things like that you're doing, all the ingredients for that. You can find all of that at your local Kroger. Just stop by and see them today, or stop by Kroger.com there as well and learn about all the great things that Kroger has going on as we head towards the summer. So there's a lot of fun for Georgia recruiting right now there as well. A lot of folks, I see Tyree West and Big Bear Alexander kind of coming in, and you just run through all the names. Pierce Sperling, there's like a million names that have kind of been on social media saying, hey, I'm going to be in Athens, ready to be there right when the doors open up for the opening up of the ending of this dead period. And it's just kind of fun to see this all again. I'm happy to have this news kind of erupting all around us on social media. I know it'll be busy for Jeff Sintel as he covers it all, our DawgNation recruiting insider. But beyond that, Connor, what do you think it means?
I think this is going to be one of the busiest offseason months in the history of college football. I don't know how many commitments we see straight away from this month. I don't. If the number is more than 2, I'd be pretty surprised. But I think this month in particular is going to have a massive impact come February 2022, or I guess December 2021, when these guys do end up signing. Because right now, if you've got guys taking their official visits now and making it clear where they're going to end up going, that lets teams know where they are in recruitments with prospective athletes, and from there they're going to be able to adjust and move their boards to say, okay, well, we may not be as high on this guy's list as we thought. Let's go try and target some other guys and pivot quickly there. So it's going to be an incredibly busy weekend. The 2 dates, obviously today is a big day, but there are 2 dates in particular. Everyone knows about the official visit list this weekend. It should be very interesting. There are 2 dates that I would pay special attention to. June 3rd, and then the weekend of June 18th through the 20th. June 3rd, there are going to be 3 prospects here. I believe all of them are 5 stars from the Thompson program in Alabama. That would be 5-star Jeremiah Alexander in the 2022 class, Tony Mitchell, a 5-star cornerback in the 2023 class, and 5-star defensive lineman Peter Woods in the 2023 class. Obviously, pulling those guys from the state of Alabama, more specifically the Alabama program, is going to be difficult, but it's something Georgia has shown that from time to time they're able to do before, and I'll be interested to see how those visits impact their relationship with Georgia. The other weekend that is the most interesting to me in terms of where Georgia ultimately finishes in the 2021, or I guess 2022 recruiting rankings, is that weekend of the 18th to the 20th, when you have the IMG kids, other than Kamari Wilson, who is visiting this weekend, coming to visit. Because if Georgia's going to sign the number 1 class in the 2022 recruiting cycle, they're going to need to land multiple kids out of IMG Academy. That's guys like Tyler Booker, guys like Kamari Wilson, Keon Sabb, Dalen Everett, Jihad Campbell. They have a ton of talent. They have a lot of guys that are really interested in the Georgia program, and if the Bulldogs are able to win some of those recruiting battles, I think that's going to go a long way in Georgia finishing with potentially the number 1 class in the country.
Yeah, I think that's a very good way of looking at all of that. when I, kind of think about, kind of what's going on here, I just think that it's just really fascinating to see the way in which last year for the previous recruiting cycle, obviously Georgia probably signed more in-state guys. We're used to seeing them sign. Now, part of that's because of just the incredible level of depth in the state right now, but also that was kind of brought on by necessity because of the absence of visits. Do you see now more room for what you want to call national recruiting or regional recruiting? You mentioned the Alabaster, the kids from Thompson High School. Is there more opportunity for that because you're hosting those visitors in a way that you couldn't have convinced players like that a year ago because you couldn't get them on campus? Or for Alabama a year ago, they probably signed the greatest class that maybe anyone's ever signed. Is there more opportunity for not just Georgia but other schools to kind of recruit against Alabama because all of a sudden now in person you can convince somebody not to go to Tuscaloosa? And does that change the shape of the SEC recruiting here? We saw the ways a year ago in which the pandemic impacted the 2021 class. Does the absence of the pandemic now change the complexion of the 2022 class?
Alabama's still going to have a great recruiting class. Ohio State as well. But I think there's a chance that these kids are less concentrated in certain schools, and obviously that'll impact Georgia as well and their ability to recruit going forward. But I look at a program like Florida State right now that they had a midnight event last night, 12:01. They started hosting kids on campus. They're the type of program that I think really stands to benefit from this, where you got a young coach. Ole Miss is another team like this. Come in, see our program, meet face to face, and really give those programs a leg up that they really couldn't stand on a season ago. And obviously with Georgia, I don't think you see the wild swings that you have in terms of the 2019 and 2020 classes were more out of state than in state, and then last year it was so heavily based on in-state recruits. I think it's going to be a healthier mix of in-state kids and out-of-state kids going forward for this Georgia class. But getting these visits, I think, is pivotal for guys like Big Bear Alexander to come back and see this campus and meet face-to-face with these coaches, because these guys have not had the opportunity to do so just yet.
Fascinating times. Great stuff. Connor, we'll look forward to reading a lot more from you at DawgNation.com. Connor's also got his own show tonight on the DawgNation video channels. Hope you will check that out. And Connor, we'll look forward to speaking to you again here as a part of our Kroger Fresh Take on DawgNation Daily again very soon there as well.
Yep, as always, was a pleasure, BA.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, I mean, listen, look, ultimately all of this is supposed to be for entertainment. This is fun. Now, for the players, it's a livelihood. It's a way of setting themselves up to make a living, and obviously the coaches, it's their living right now. But all of this exists in the way that it does because it entertains us, and it's just great to have college football and Georgia football in particular being so entertaining right now in this kind of portion of the summer, looking to see who Georgia's adding, looking to see which recruits Georgia's taking visits from, and obviously setting the stage for Georgia to really put a national championship team on the field here for this upcoming fall. All of this is just really fun right now, and I'm happy to be able to talk to you about all of it. Let me also give a quick shout out to my friends at Merriweather and Tharp. Bob Tharp, one of the partners there at Merriweather and Tharp. He's loving seeing all of this going on with UGA right now, as Georgia's obviously kind of in the mix for a lot of big news here. And, of course, Merriweather and Tharp, also your source for Georgia divorce there as well. That's an important thing, and it's one of those things where, the outcome for you is going to be so different depending on, do you have an attorney on your side when you go through all of this? You don't want to be kind of left to your own devices or kind of left at the mercy of whatever happens in the courts. You want to kind of help shape your own outcome. That's what a attorney will do for you in a process like this. And no better attorneys to go to bat for you and go to work for you than your source for Georgia divorce, Merriweather and Tharp. You can find them online, theatlantadivorceteam.com. That's theatlantadivorceteam.com. They'll educate you on the process, but more importantly, they'll roll up their sleeves. They will go to work. They'll fight for you if necessary. They will get it done. Theatlantadivorceteam.com, Merriweather and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. All right, let me step away here just briefly from kind of all the big news related to recruiting and transfers and everything else. Let me mention a couple of other Georgia stories as it relates to the SEC here for a moment. First of all, congratulations to UGA softball. Big upset, I would say, on the road against Gainesville in the in Gainesville against Florida in the Super Regional, but Georgia prevails there. What an amazing performance here. Now moving on to Oklahoma City in the Women's College World Series. This is an incredible, incredible performance and a great thing to be able to see. And I was kind of, following this a little bit on the weekend. Many of you have sent messages to me about how excited you were to see Georgia not just advance in the Women's College World Series, which is a very big deal, but also do so by beating Florida in a Super Regional. That is just an incredible thing to be able to see. And I got to tell you, Softball's one of those sports that maybe a year or so ago I didn't really know much about. I'm still not very well educated on the sport really whatsoever. But man, this is a very entertaining thing to watch here. Kind of a cool, part of our sporting summer when it comes to college athletics here, and to see the Dogs doing so well. Also a great thing to be able to see there as well. So congratulations to the Lady Dogs as they move on to Oklahoma City and the Women's College World Series here after knocking down those lousy, stinking Gators in Gainesville in the Super Regional. We'll have more on that for our Golden Shoe a little bit later on. The news was not as good for Georgia baseball, who after winning the first SEC tournament game against LSU and then getting beaten up by Arkansas and then losing the final game to Ole Miss, gets excluded from the NCAA tournament. And I guess this is one of those things you see in basketball a lot, where there was some what you call bid stealers, when teams kind of moved up the rankings and end up taking one of those spots away that at one point in time would have gone to Georgia. Because I actually, going into the SEC tournament, Georgia, by Baseball America and D1 Baseball, some of these sites that cover college baseball pretty closely, they actually had Georgia in the field. But obviously those kind of bracketology college baseball sites had kind of moved Georgia out of the field even before the official field was announced, and some of this was related to some of the teams who worked their way in. I guess the explanation ends up being Georgia just not enough wins against tournament teams when it comes to their overall record. And, look, tough league, the SEC. I mean, I guess I feel like Georgia has a fairly decent case to be included in the field. I think I saw Georgia's RPIs at 41. The top 40 teams in RPI all made the NCAA field. There were teams rated behind Georgia that also made it there as well. But the case against Georgia, I guess, ends up being not enough wins against, tournament quality competition. And what this really reminds me of is, of all like the Georgia sports things, the fact that last year's baseball team, that had Cole Wilcox, that had Emerson Hancock, that had all that talent, the fact they had that season taken from them and what could have been an unbelievably magical year for Georgia, the fact that Georgia just comes up a little bit short for making this year's tournament, I think it does kind of remind you of just what Georgia missed out on last year with all the talent they had, not making not having a chance to have any kind of baseball season whatsoever. That's obviously spilled milk now, and you got to move on from that. But, boy, that still will always be a disappointing thing for me, more reminder of that, with Georgia missing out on this year's field for the NCAA tournament. And, of course, the other big news, remember here, as we talked with Connor a moment ago, dead period now ended for recruiting. They're all over the place, not just at Georgia. I like Connor's headline there. The dead period is now dead. Yes, the dead period is over. It's not here anymore. And that's fun if you want to give an idea for just how big it is for Georgia. They're huge names. Guys like Bear Alexander saying Athens tomorrow, Big Bear in town. No better way to kind of open the door for new recruiting and visits than bring in a gigantic, both literally and figuratively, gigantic recruit for Georgia on hand with Bear Alexander. His magnetic personality will also, I think be enticing for other recruits there as well. So much going on around UGA, so much fun, and so happy to be able to talk to all of you about it here on DawgNation Daily, presented by ESOG. By the way, speaking of the softball team, let's actually make them the subject of our Golden Shoe. And yes, I know many of you pointed this out before, like the Golden Shoe kind of toggles back and forth between being a mockery trophy for somebody who does something bad and a actual, like, admirable trophy for somebody who does something good. And I guess we're sort of comfortable with that. We're sort of comfortable with that tension around here. But Jermaine King, who's been a winner of our Golden Shoe before, is going to take on the prize again today for something that he tweeted, obviously talking about how great it was to see. Yeah, he says, all right, BA, this is Jermaine on Twitter. Nothing screams Gator hater more than our unseeded Georgia softball team sweeping fourth-seeded Florida in Gainesville, ending the Gator season and advancing to the Women's College World Series. Jermaine King is so right about that. He even includes a beautiful photo of the dog pile celebration for the dogs after all that went down. Great to see that. And by the way, in football, speaking of those lousy, stinking Gators, how about 151 days from right now, Georgia in Jacksonville, going to be Florida again. We will see you tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. And on video, time now for our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. We're going to talk about all the stuff going on, give you a chance to weigh in on it all, and we'll say thanks to R.S. Andrews for making it all possible. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric. R.S. Andrews will show up on time, They'll do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. One of the reasons why I love recommending them. You can find them online at rsandrews.com. They'll take good care of you today. And that air conditioning, boy, that's big time this time of year. So keep thinking about that as you head throughout the summer. rsandrews.com for more on that. All right, let's, by the way, Jermaine King celebrating his own golden shoe win in the Facebook comment section. Great to be able to see that. Bill Sanders gives us an and-on video, and you better believe we're over here doing that for sure. Mike Mazzell said a good thing would be to put a whooping on Clemson opening day. Yeah, so I told you I drove up South Carolina, North Carolina, into Virginia, Washington, D.C., Baltimore, came back home, and on the way back home yesterday, we stopped in Charlotte. First of all, Charlotte's a beautiful city. I didn't really spend, I guess, a ton of time downtown Charlotte, but very beautiful city. Seeing Bank of America Stadium where the game's going to take place kind of give me a little bit of chills of, ooh, I can't wait to be back there coming up in September. We also went to the NASCAR Hall of Fame for what it's worth. That was a really fun thing to do. They have like legitimate, like real iRacing simulators in there. Those are really fun to mess around with. But the point is, being in Charlotte just kind of got me really thinking about what a big deal it's going to be, there for that game and the excitement of all of that. It's just going to be a great time. Can't wait for it. R. Edward Moore says Big June on tap. It is indeed. Corey Key says, I got my tickets for some Gator bashing. That's a good thing to be able to hear. Great for that. John William Adams was also in Charlotte this weekend. Dreaming of my return trip in September. Terrific, ultra clean. Yeah, it is. Boy, I tell you what, when you see a lot of cities in like consecutive fashion, you sort of realize that some are more clean than others. Charlotte is very clean. I was in Richmond, Virginia as well. We spent the Sunday night in Richmond, Virginia. Let me tell you something. It's not like a super clean city. And it's not as big as Charlotte either. But that is not a super clean city. But boy, Richmond is. Somebody's talked about me using iPad. I'm using a phone instead of the iPad. So I used to use my laptop, and eventually I'm going to go back to doing that. I just haven't done that. But I can see fine on this. My eyesight's good. Randy Hall says, have I ever been to Mooresville to see NASCAR history? I have not, actually, Randy. I have not. Jennifer Caldwell Sperlin says, going to be in Charlotte in a few weeks for the Lacrosse Summer League. Yeah, I mean, I thought Charlotte was kind of a nice town. Like I said, I haven't spent a ton of time, I guess, in downtown Charlotte. Being there this weekend kind of made me realize how little time I've spent there, but it was very nice. Very nice. Brian Jones says getting Gilbert and Kendrick would be double chortle worthy. You better believe it would be. Bill Sanders, it sounds like quite an event to be a part of. Chip Gromlich says, I live in Richmond, and you are correct. Chip, that's really funny. I didn't mean to disparage your city, but yeah, it was an interesting place. It was an interesting place. Joel Moody says, how about the idea of Nakobe Dean spying on DJ Uiagalelei if he leaves the pocket scrambling? Boy, yeah, that's a harrowing thought if you're the quarterback on the other side of that. Shabazz Ali says he's got the Gilbert news. So a lot of folks looking to find that news and talk about all of that. We shall see. Brandon Griffin, speaking of the Georgia tight end room, says Brock Bowers is flying under the radar. He says with all the star power he has, he's a legit. And I do think that Bowers is a potential big-time playmaker. I do. Robert Barnes says, I don't tweet, but for the ones that do, welcome the Big Bear to Athens. I'm sure he's having a great time. Danny Blackman, good to see you in the comment section. Brandon Griffin says, if a Rick comes to UGA and he plays the X with Darnell, Burton, and Arian, who do you double? And you can't stack the box, so our running backs would run wild. And I think that's a good point from Brandon. This is one of the things you've seen from Georgia the last couple of years is you just have not run the ball quite as effectively as they had in the past. And I think some of that, certainly 2019, was about the lack of respect for that passing game. That with that not quite being, what you hoped it could be, you have more opportunities for defenses to help stop the run. And I think you see the running game for Georgia suffer. In 2019, certainly, and even last year, Georgia wasn't as explosive offensively in the running game as it's been in the past. But once the passing game gets going at its full, highest potential, all of a sudden it becomes way, way easier to imagine, great success of the running game there as well. I think that Brandon's right about that. Jordan Bowman says, he's a Clemson fan, says, wish our football success had a similar effect on our other programs. All we got is our softball and soccer teams, men's golf too. That is interesting. I guess I haven't thought about this being a little bit of a drought for Clemson with other athletics. I will say this, Jordan. When I was in high school, I would occasionally go. My high school coach would get tickets. We'd occasionally go to Clemson games there at the old Little John Coliseum. I guess maybe it's the same. I don't know if it's been upgraded, renovated or not. But I used to really enjoy going to basketball games there at Little John. They used to get, back when the ACC was the ACC, they would get good crowds for those big ACC games coming in. I've actually been to a decent number of games there at Little John. Let's see what else. Thomas Tyson on the subject of Georgia throwing the ball more than it has in the past. Yeah, last year was a step in that direction. Anson McMahon, good to see you in the comment section. Anson, I feel like we hadn't seen you in a while. I'm glad to have you here, Anson. Dapper Dan, by the way, boy, it seems like we're seeing a lot of our names back in here for a first time in a while. Dapper Dan says, Connor said all that needed to be said regarding Arik Gilbert. There are very few athletic freaks like Gilbert on the entire planet. He's an absolute freak. And, yeah, this is one of those guys that he's just such an intriguing athlete because of his body type and his skill set. And, I think he really compares. The player on the Georgia roster he reminds me the most of is probably someone like George Pickens. Connor Graham says Clemson also dropped its track team as well. I didn't realize that. Jordan Bowman says Little John has gone through a lot of renovations. It's kind of funny. Obviously, there's some buildings that need to be renovated, but there's also an example of, when things get nicer, the actual in-gym atmosphere gets a little worse. I think most Maryland fans would probably say, since they built that Comcast Center, or whatever it's called now, it's not quite as cool as the old, field house used to be. Some of these things, once they get nicer, the quality of the crowd gets a little worse. I think that Arkansas was never the same in Bud Walton Arena as it was in the old days, the old Barnhill Arena back, before they built Bud Walton. Let's see what else. Anson McMahon asked about Zeus reportedly not going to California. That's still a pretty expensive trip. You have to pay your own way. Who knows what these guys have going on during the summer. So I guess my thought on this, Anson, is I wouldn't make too big of a deal about who was there, just given the fact that a lot of the guys who were there have at least some sort of tie and connection to California, right? Even someone like Jermaine Burton briefly lived in California while he was in high school. Josh Grafton says, have you ever thought about taking calls in the cool down like Paul Feinbaum? I have thought about that. Josh, this is a true story. One time we said we're going to start doing that, and then we had a whole bunch of commenters say, no, we don't want you to do that. So we were going to do that at one point in time, and commenters told us not to. So we decided to leave it the same. But we're going to do something along those lines pretty soon. But it may not be on the cool down. It may be like a separate cool down on another platform. Frank Patterson says the 2023 running back Richard Young is in Athens this weekend. I know he spent 80% of the show on Gilbert and 5% on softball. But he said you should at least mention Richard Young. Yeah, that's really exciting too. Really exciting for sure. Let's see what else. A lot of folks weighing in here. Mike Mazzell checking out, though. Yeah, so it's going to be really interesting. That's one of the things I would encourage you to check in with, Jeff Sintel on the pages of DawgNation.com. Going to be chronicling all of those visits and what's going on here. And it's going to be multiple names really each day. Certainly most of the days will have multiple names. And so following all of this is going to be really, really crucial. And, in some cases it's just going to be a visit and there's not going to be a whole lot of news to come out of that. In other cases, it's going to be, something, much bigger. So we'll see. We'll follow it all and see how it goes. More action over here on YouTube for right now. G. Grace Bama Boy weighing in on Kendall Milton, looking to see a big season from Milton. Johnny Lester says that Todd Monken's offense is definitely going to be passing a lot. I can't wait to see all his route concepts and his misdirections and the pre-snap adjustments. Yeah, that's the stuff where I think most offensive coordinators really kind of make their bones. I think that Steve Sarkisian, that was one of the things he was good at Alabama. They probably run the same 4 or 5 plays over and over again, but you just have so many different looks, formations pre-snap, that it's hard to identify what they're doing, even if they just keep running the same plays. But yeah, I mean, I also think in the case of Monken, this is a guy that understands the way in which the aggressive passing attack can make things easier for a running game, that you can actually set up your running game for more success based on how effectively you throw the ball. I believe that's true. Dante E. says these skill positions are cute and all, but we better figure out those offensive line positions. And pretty clearly that remains to be a concern that a lot of folks have. They do want to see Georgia figure out its left tackle situation, for instance, and I guess you can include center in that there as well, although I think at the beginning of the season, Warren Erickson's probably set up to start there with Cedric Von Prawn pushing for playing time somewhere at one of the interior spots before the year is done. But clearly that's a question that has to be answered. Enrique Murillo says, what are you looking to see more of this season? For me, it always comes down to the same thing. I really feel like I've been saying this before the season for the last, I think, 3 years at least. I want to see more explosive passing plays and more dynamic, negative defensive plays. I want sacks, and I want 20-plus yard explosive passing throws. Those are the two things I want to see a lot more of. And if you do, that to me is the recipe for a national championship. You need both those things there. Richard D. says, with all the large number of recruits, hopefully no diamonds in the rough are missed. No, Richard, I think that's one of the things that Georgia's probably really good at is, I think that when you have, like Connor mentioned, like the Florida State event midnight, I don't really know that, but there are these like gigantic, like big tent recruiting events where I do think you can have guys get missed. I mean, to be completely honest, I am kind of led to believe that maybe over the course of years at like a dog night back in the old Rick days and things like that, there may have been some guys that didn't feel like they got enough attention, just because when you have a gigantic recruiting event, it's a little harder to give enough attention to a lot of people. Even when you have like it can be challenging when you have like multiple big-time visitors during a game weekend when there's a lot going on and, you're having a meal with this guy means you're not having a meal with that guy. That can be challenging, but I do think that Georgia is certainly under Kirby Smart's leadership set up well to handle all of that and not get, too caught up where they're not able to give enough attention to each guy. I think your concern is one that programs do think a lot about. How do we bring in a lot of guys in, but not bring in too many that we can't give enough individual love and attention to all those guys, especially for those who want that, face-to-face contact, things like that. And I think that Georgia's certainly probably thinking a lot about that as you head towards the month. I think you're probably right about that. All right, let's wrap up with this. Don't forget to check out the Atlanta Journal-Constitution online, ajc.com. Obviously, there is a lot going on. Hawks getting ready for a Game 5 coming up on, tomorrow against the Knicks with a commanding 3-1 lead in that series. It's been great to see how the Hawks have played in this series thus far. They're looking to do that. Also, Braves coming back home again after kind of a rainy weekend there in New York City, so kind of following all that there too. Boy, just a lot going on around the city of Atlanta here, and more look at Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms on the aftermath of her decision not to run for re-election, kind of what's going on there. There's a lawsuit related to the All-Star game not being in Atlanta, the baseball All-Star game, so a bunch of stuff there. And, by the way, a Music Midtown lineup update. Fun to think this is back. Fun to think there's all kinds of live music happening around the city of Atlanta again. So big update on all of that. You can find it online. Atlanta Journal-Constitution at ajc.com. Make sure you check that out. Also, check out our friends at R.S. Sanders. They will get your air conditioning tuned back up to factory fresh spec, which is important as we head towards the hot summer that's on its way. A little bit mild temperatures this past weekend, but hot weather's coming. So get your system tuned back up today online at rsandrews.com. Guys and gals, thanks for being here today. Appreciate your comments, your thoughts on everything going on. We'll be back to talk more about it tomorrow. DawgNation Daily presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. I'll look forward to seeing you then. 10 a.m. tomorrow morning, everybody. For more DawgNation videos, check out youtube.com.